Hey Captains, Ipsok here, and today we're going to be discussing a very important topic. How to tell if that ship girl in the bar has a rudder under her decking. What? What's that? Oh, legal says we can't do that one for sure. Oh, okay. Like I said, we're doing CIWS. Okay, so you want to shoot down missiles with guns. Why? Because why not? Missiles, guns, shooting missiles with guns? What's not to like? Alright, so if you're going to do that, the first thing you need to do is get yourself one of these bad boys right here, the anti-missile cannon controller. Now you can pick these up at your local Best Buy or Fry's or whatever you got next to you. Go down and get you one of these, and this is the basis for your CIWS. It's just like the local weapons controller, except its sole purpose is to shoot at incoming projectiles, or well, actually just missiles, I guess. Alright, so let's look at the settings in here and see what we need to talk about. Alright, there's a whole ton of settings in here. Let's start with the top ones and work our way down. Alright, range bracket. Should be pretty self-explanatory. Now, keep in mind, munition warners don't reach out that far unless you're looking at large missiles, and then you can get out 1,500 meters, maybe a little beyond sometimes. But a lot of stuff is going to be 1,000 meters or less before the munition warners are going to pick it up. And if the munition warners don't see it, the anti-missile cannon controller doesn't see it, and your CIWS guns aren't going to shoot at it. So set this to whatever you like, but just keep in mind the limitations of the system. Altitude bracket. Now, by default, it's set to minus 100, and that's going to shoot at torpedoes. You may or may not want that. Also, if you have an anti-torpedo type CIWS, which is basically just CIWS with, supercavitation base, then you can set this bracket to reflect that and shoot at torpedoes. Maybe you only want your gun to shoot at one or the other, or maybe both. Who knows? You know. Then set that in here and adjust your bracket accordingly. You can set the diameter to engage, so you can set this from small all the way up to large missiles or whatever, and limit what you're going to shoot at. Don't ask me what the diameters of the various missiles are. I don't know. Go look it up. Maximum fire rate, 40 plus infinity. I don't know why this is here. Don't touch it. All right. This is right here is the secret sauce for a lot of things in CIWS. This is how many shots your CIWS gun is going to take at an individual missile before giving up and switching to the next target. If you're shooting large caliber shells, flak or whatever, then this default of 3 isn't so bad. But if you're down shooting 30 millimeter CIWS, 18 millimeter CIWS, whatever, you're going to want to crank this up. The smaller the caliber, the more acceptable shots you're going to want to take at each missile, because after it hits this number, it's going to give up, and that may not be enough damage for the low cal stuff to destroy a missile. So pay very close attention to what you set this to and adjust it accordingly depending on the size and caliber and damage potential of your guns. The rest of this below here is how and when it chooses to shift from one target to another. I will be honest, this is going to be a basic CIWS tutorial. I don't understand most of these settings down here. They're fairly self-explanatory, I think, in terms of, what angle to lose priority with and everything else, but I generally never touch these. And at the very bottom, you have a priority setting. This is used if you're going to run dual mode, where you have a local weapons controller and an AMCC, to choose which one has priority to use the gun. If you want a CIWS gun that backs up that doubles as like an anti-aircraft gun, you're going to want to mess with this priority. All right, so that takes care of the anti-missile cannon controller. Next, we're going to move on to shell selection. Now, there are various camps here when it comes to CIWS and shells and what to use. Again, this is a basic CIWS tutorial, so we're not going to get into the fancy stuff. I can tell you I've seen excellent examples of pure kinetic stuff that is, 18 millimeter kinetic that can wipe out large missiles. It's neat stuff, but it's a little advanced for this tutorial. So let's just stick to the basics. your good old trustworthy flak. If you look at this shell here, it is nothing but some flak and a time fuse and a little bit of gunpowder. Now, I know that shell looks kind of slow, but we're not trying to punch holes through the side of a bulwark here. We're trying to shoot down missiles. So, for my rule of thumb here, when in doubt, if you have to choose between speed and payload, choose payload. The bigger the diameter explosion and the more damage you're going to do, the better off you're going to be. And since missiles travel, they're going to be traveling straight at your ships for the most part, or in a fairly consistent trajectory, then we don't have to worry about speed quite so much. And we're going to use that to our advantage to load up on payload. Okay? Now, for everything I've seen, CIWS is all about getting DACA downrange to blow up the incoming missiles. And so we want to throw as much DACA down there as we can. We load up on payload, and then we load up on RPM. Now, when I was doing testing to get ready for this tutorial, I sat down here and I built this little missile test rig that shoots, that I can choose which type of missiles I want to launch at me, and the little test rig you're sitting on here. And then I broke out my second favorite game of all time, Excel. Yes, sir. You get yourself a nice Excel table, and what you're looking at here are some of the shells that I tested. They're all using the same gun, basically, and I just, increase or decrease the caliber and adjust to the maximum RPM in the same footprint. So you can see if you look at the volumes over there, I don't have them quite all listed. The volumes are all the same because I was using 1 meter autoloaders, node clips, and just running the same thing and changing the gauge a little bit and maybe changing the powder load out, the shell load out a little bit. And what I found in the footprint I was using, you'll see the cannon later, what I found was that for this particular gun, this 80 millimeter CIWS at 302 RPM gave me the most damage per minute downrange and at a decent radius to boot. So now, that's not to say that the 180 millimeter stuff wasn't good. You can see it's down there. It's awful close. And, depending on your cannon size and what you're doing, you can do your own math. But I highly suggest you do the math. Because unlike a lot of things where there's subtlety to it, HESH or heat, or whether I'm going to do, APHE or whatever, CIWS doesn't have a lot of subtlety. Get DACA to the missile. Okay? So, get out your Excel, do the calculations, and pick the one that, gets the most damage in the biggest blast radius possible, because that's what we need. So, for these shells here, this is what we're settling on, and this is what we'll be testing with today. Next up is the part everyone always wants to be talking about, guns, guns, guns. All right. Now, I think the #1 misconception some people who are new to CIWS have is that they see something like this guy here, and they think, oh man, now that's a CIWS gun, man. It looks like the real thing. This happens to come off the tier. And they see this and they think, yep, that's my CIWS gun. That's what it should look like. And they build something that looks like this, and they're like, why doesn't it work? Well, the reason it doesn't work is because they see this, it looks like the real world example, when in fact, if you go pull this off the tier, guess what? That's what that gun really looks like. It's a beast. It's huge. Those tiny little things that look like the real world examples, they don't cut it. Here, this gun, if I turn the thing back on here, is an 878 RPM 80 millimeter gun. Now, this particular one happens to be belt fed, and that brings me to something else that a lot of people may disagree with me. But I do not use belt fed for CIWS. I do not like the idea of having a gap in my firing sequence because, I've been around long enough. I know that if I put belt feds in there, Murphy's Law is going to bite me in the ass, and I'm going to have a big reload gap when there's some giant swarm of missiles, coming down on my ship. And so I just deal with making my stuff, regular auto feeders, and I make that work. And I would rather have, I would rather have a few missiles get through because I don't have quite the RPM than have them all get through because my gun decided that that was a good time to take a nap and reload. So, when you're looking at these guns, keep in mind that, you know, this is the gun on the left here comes right off of my most recent battle cruiser, and there is one on either side, plus a smaller version on the stern, and an auxiliary CIWS gun that's a 3-meter version in the bow. So even this big giant honking, you know, gun here isn't enough to stop most swarms that you're going to see in the campaign. So you need to be, you know, be realistic about what size gun is going to be effective, and you need to keep that in mind when you go to build your stuff. Now, as you saw from the chart before, from my Excel chart there, that was a 302 RPM gun. Here it is right here. That's the gun that you were seeing on that highlighted line. And this is what I'm using currently if I have the room for it. Now, if your ship just doesn't have the room, you know, you have to figure out what else you're going to do. Now, keep in mind, for CIWS, you know, I like CIWS. Man, it looks cool, but it should not be the end-all be-all. It should not be the only thing you're using. You should be using flares, decoys, lambs if you want to back it up with lambs. Actually, you know, missile interceptors work great. And in fact, in testing, I actually found that if you're willing to spend the ammo on them, you're a lot better off going with missile interceptors. You can actually fit a missile interceptor package into something the size of this turret cap here that will outperform this turret. It will eat its weight in ammo about every 10 seconds, though, and that is the drawback there. So, you know, there are always trade-offs, but keep in mind you're going to have to devote a lot of size and space under the covers here to get effective CIWS. And again, everything you need to know about it is that it is getting DACA downrange. These guns are designed to get DACA downrange. In fact, the tier has, you know, this is the rear gun from the tier. It has two similar but smaller side guns that also double. These double on the tier. I believe they double as anti-aircraft guns as well, so they're pulling double duty. But their priority is to CIWS. So that's, you know, that's something to keep in mind, is that you need to devote the space and the resources. And these guns are not cheap. If we go look here, if I go here and look at sub-objects, that tier gun there is 54, almost 55,000 RP. The 302 millimeter or 302 RPM gun is 30,000 resources just for that CIWS gun, and so they're not cheap. And so you really do have to pay to play when it comes to CIWS. So there you have it. Guns, expensive guns, big guns that are going to take up a truckload of space in your ship if you want them to work. One last helpful hint I have for you, and that has to do with the timing of your fuse. So I have found that it works much better to have a little bit of a negative lead time on your shell fuse so that the shells are exploding just a little bit short of the incoming missiles. That makes sure that the missile is flying into a cloud of flak and not flying, you know, having the cloud explode right on top of it just as it's leaving it. So if you look at my cannons here, you will find wherever I hid where did I hide it? There it is. You will find on this particular shell, I have a minus 0.07. I keep them in the range. Larger caliber stuff, I usually set it about minus 0.03 to about and then I go all the way up to a minus 0.07, and it kind of depends on the radius of the explosion and the speed of the shell. Slower shells, I tend to give a little bit heavier negative bias. Faster shells, I tone this down to down into the minus 0.03. Adjust it, play with it, see what works, but I highly suggest a little bit of negative fusing on your shells just to make sure that you're flying into the flak rather than flying out of it. All right, boys and girls, what have we learned here today? Alright, the basic stuff to remember when you're building CIWS. Anti-missile cannon controller. Check your ranges, your altitudes, and especially your acceptable shot settings. Those are what's going to get you more hits in the right spots, and make sure you have enough shots on the target to kill it. Shell selection. Always choose the extra damage and radius over a little bit of speed. If you want to go down the railgun route, we're not going to cover that here. You can do even better because you can devote the entire shell to payload and a fuse and not have casings in the way. If you're going with a pure, if you've seen my Burt gun tutorial, you know that you can get away with not having any railgun casings in your shell at all, and you can go that route. Totally different setup, but hey, that works too. It's all about getting the most DACA downrange. 3, don't forget your fuse. You'd be amazed how much difference that little tiny bit of negative fusing increases your kill rate. It's very important, and you need to play with the settings and adjust it for your shells and make sure you and the speed that they run at and get what works for you. But that minus 0.05 is a good starting point. Lastly, do the math. RPM, damage potential, DACA downrange. This isn't fancy. This is all about getting big explosions onto the target with as much damage as possible to make sure the missiles die. So don't get fancy, just sling DACA as fast as possible. Alright, that's all I have for you. Hopefully if you've done your math right and you get your numbers right, your day goes well and you get to stand here and have cool explosions behind you while the missiles die. Alright? Good luck. Party on.